let's see if we can mess up the Empire State Building here. I've got this very low poly model off of Blend Swap, and I want to use the Ruinator to ruin it. So the first thing we need to do is make sure it's the right size. So I'm going to open up my N panel over here and look at the dimensions. Right now it's only 4 meters high, so let's make it a lot bigger. And so I'm just going to hit S for scale and scale it way up. And its center of origin is way up here at the top for some reason. So let's just move it to the bottom. I'm going to go to tab mode, face, and Shift S and cursor to selected. And then let's go back into object mode, and then object set origin, origin to geometry, or origin to 3D cursor. So that way when I scale it up, goes from that area right there. And I'm not going to make it totally life size. I'm just going to get it up to about 60 meters tall. And so that way it's bigger than other things. So this makes the Ruinator work a little bit better if you work with large shapes, because it tries to be somewhat to scale. But if you work with a really small shape, it won't work at all. So you got to make your objects big. And that's just how it works. You can change it after the fact, but you won't see anything if you start with a very small object. So after we've got that done, we want to set the scale. So right now the scale is much larger than it should be. So let's go ahead and hit Control A and hit all transform. So now the scale is 1, and the meters are still roughly 60 meters high. And so what we want to do next is we want to subdivide it. So if we look at it through flat shading here, we see it's very low poly. So I'm just going to use some control loops, Control R, and just crank this up right here. And the control loops, the polys, they help us set up a border between the alpha channel that we'll use to cut a hole and the original mesh of this tower. So the way the Ruinator works is that it uses an alpha channel based on a heat map or whatever to cut out the hole. So that way it's non-destructive. But in order for there to be enough sort of resolution or polys to work with, you have to have a mesh with some polys. So don't go crazy, but you need to have some. I'd say this is, depending on what you're trying to do, this is a good amount. There we go. So Control R for simple control loops. Then the next step we want to do is go into edit mode again. Let's go into X-ray mode here and just select some mesh. So I'm going to hit C for circle select and select a random area. The Ruinator works best when you're going through a corner. It'll work on a flat surface, but it can't develop an interior debris field if it's just on a flat surface. And so I'll show what that means here in a minute. But after we've got some text, or rather it's late, sorry. We've got some mesh selected. I will go over to the vertex group. So we'll create a new vertex group. And this is important. We got to call it ruined, R-U-I-N-E-D. That's the variable that's set up in the Ruinator. So we assign it after we have it set. And if you're not sure if it's set, I can hit AA to deselect things. And if ruined is selected here, then we hit select. So that's in the vertex groups. And that's another thing about the Ruinator. It assumes you have some basic experience and user interface knowledge of the way Blender works and functions. It'd be pretty confusing if you do not. So we've got ruined set up here, and we've got the Empire State Building here. So what we need to do next is import the Ruinator. So I'm going to go to append. And let's go over here to the Ruinator, and here is the Ruinator file. The version 5.0 is the version we're working with here. We'll go to node trees and import the Ruinator version 5.05. That brings it in as an asset. It's now in the RAM, but it's not doing anything. It also automatically brings in the materials it needs for this. So the next step would be to add the Ruinator. So we go over to modifiers, add a modifier, geometry nodes, and then we got to choose it from the RAM. So it's right here, it's an asset, Ruinator version 5. So we'll start to see the debris on the building, but we can't see through it yet because we've got to actually apply the shading. So here is the Empire State texture right here, but what we need to do is add a node that's already in there, a node group, the Ruinator alpha generator. So then we just take the ruined alpha and we plug that into the alpha map here, and it'll automatically cut out a hole where we painted that texture. It doesn't look real good, and the floors are too far apart right now, so we'll make some adjustments. Come over to the modifier, and here in the modifier we have a lot of settings, and I'll be adding more as time goes by. The floor spacing is set to 2 to be safe, so you don't make too much of a giant mesh. I'm just going to pull this down until it matches the distance of the floors in the original texture somewhat. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. And then you can play around with the beam size. So here's the beam radius. It normally is best to have like a smaller radius, and you can turn on whether you want that to be triangulated or not. And then the beam or edge proximity. The smaller the number, the closer to the edge of the hole it will be. Now it doesn't look very good right now because we're in material preview and ray tracing is not turned on. So let's turn on ray tracing so it actually gets dark in the interior of our structure. And then let's turn on rendered mode, and let's make our light a sunlight. Let's change this to say 8, and then it's starting to look a little bit better. But what we can do is add some other things. And if, yeah, let's go and just change this debris a little bit. So select the object and go over to debris. We can add more debris here so that we have more debris. You can change the debris size so that's a little bit more varied. And you can play around with destruction. So destruction basically distorts the mesh that's generated in the hole that we've drawn. And so if I distort it here, you can see how it's sort of warping it out and making things a little bit crazy. And this lets this distortion scale allows you to change the point at which that distortion is activated. So that's looking a little bit better there. And it doesn't hold up real well when you get super close, but it does hold up at a distance. So if you're making a large sort of scene, this is where it gets pretty effective. And a couple other things here. If you change the beam radius, there is a random beam size here. If you wanted certain beams to be just sort of randomly larger, you can do that. That adds a little bit more variety to it. And then you can have more pipes, lots of pipe debris coming out of that. You can change those settings to a certain degree. Pipe density and so forth are all there to just add more materials. I'll be adding more debris types and more objects as time goes on, and I would like to add the option for users to be able to plug in their own geometry as debris for this. And like most sliders in Blender, I have the destruct amount maxing out at 6 here, but if you type in 10 or any number higher, you can make the destruction go even further. And then the complexity, if it's not detailed enough, you can turn up that and it'll subdivide it. I always start out very simple though, and let's keep this very low. And so then if we want to actually paint on or take away this debris field, there's a couple things you got to do. We'll enter weight paint mode here. You see it's all blue because normally when you're painting with weight paint, you need to see where the hot points and the cold points are. So we're just going to turn off the overlays, and by default our weight painting brush should be on mix. And so when it's on mix, we're going to basically be adding to the ruined vertex group. So I'm just hitting F to make my brush bigger. You can see how I'm actually painting onto that group to make it bigger. And we can go into other spots. It does not need to be contiguous, but as you can see here, what's happening is that the brush or that the Ruinator is adding more mesh between these two sections. And that's kind of a cool effect. So if you add little bits and pieces here, it'll just grow to meet that. And likewise, if you wanted to take it away, you can come over to brush and go to mix and change that to subtract. And then you can just unpaint that on there. It's a little bit slower depending on your computer speed, but it should work pretty well. And so we can unpaint this. And I worked really hard to make sure that the edges of the border look a little bit more natural and don't just follow the polys. So it seems to work pretty well. And if you wanted it to just be on a flat surface, it could be not very effective, mainly because it doesn't, you can see here, when it's just on one flat surface, it doesn't have much of a density behind it because it's using a convex hull to generate the interior. And so it's got to have another side. That's why going around corners and so forth works a little bit better. So if I switch this back to mixed, if I go around a corner, then it fills it all in. Let me switch this back to subtract. So it's just on that surface, because the other way of working around that problem would be to just go to the other side. So if I come back over here and paint onto this side, then that other side will be filled out now because it's going in between that area. And so there you go. And so we can just mesh up the whole thing. There you go. So that's how the Ruinator works. And if you have any questions, send me an email, send me a message. And I hope you have fun enjoying destroying things. Thanks for watching, and